I started pastoring my first church in December of 49. Actually, it was 10 days after that Ruth Ann was born, our first child. And for about 6 months or so, we had to still stay in Leeds and go back and forth on the bus to church. But we finally were able to rent a house and lived there for a while till it sold. And then we had to move back into Birmingham, which was pretty close by. And I graduated in I finished my work in 1950, but had to wait till a summer graduation in 51. And in the meantime, we moved into a house for a short time. And I don't know, and I was working at TCI to supplement my pastor's salary, and had a wreck in the meantime coming home from the hospital one night. But our neighbors, when we moved to that house, they were not active in church at the time, but they were very friendly. And George was very much into cars and so on, and he helped me deal with the car dealers getting the car fixed. And in the meantime, they carried us out to church at Rose Hill, which is about a 10-mile drive. So as time went on, we just felt, Mom and I both felt that if we're going to go for a further education in seminary, which we needed to do, or I needed to do, that we should get on with it, And we knew, New Orleans was the closest, and we knew more about it. And I think we knew one or two people that were going there. So when we decided to move down there, I went down on the bus on a Friday night after work. And the school was open the next morning, because I went to the school and started getting signed up, to come to study. And I think they had a list of apartments around there because they didn't have enough student housing, which was just old houses. The seminary was in an old part of town at that time, and they had bought a lot of old houses and divided them up into apartments. So at first, I went over to this not far away, and a couple of elderly ladies rented an apartment there and had that going. And not long then after that, George was able to borrow a truck from a friend of his. He delivered milk. He worked for a dairy. And he drove the truck, and I rode with him. We carried what furniture we had. And Mom and Verna and our little one and her little girl, they drove the car down. And they helped us get moved in. I don't remember if they stayed more than overnight or not before they headed back. About New Orleans, that night that I went down on the bus, I got there in the evening. And I don't know if it was the things I'd heard about it being such a wicked city and stuff going on there, but it seemed like there was kind of a ominous cloud over the city when I got off the bus, and like I said, I don't remember feeling that way later after we lived there. We did live pretty close to one bar, and I tried to give out some tracts there on the corner and witness as they came out, pretty near where we lived. But we got settled in, and Mom found a job working for an airlines that flew into South America. And I noticed on her writing that she mentioned later working for people that handle houses. What do you call that?
Real estate.
Real estate, yeah. So anyhow, she helped bring in the money. Now, Southern Baptists are very helpful to their students, and I think our tuition was free. We did have to, our board and food and all was up to us. So by Mom working, that gave us an income. My GI Bill was up by then. And so we had a pretty good daily schedule. I took Ruth, who was, at that time, she was almost 2 years old. I took her to the school. What do you call that for little kids?
Like a preschool.
Yeah, or even before that, some nursery and preschool. Boy, that's a testimony to my memory here. But she stayed there, and my classes ran from about 8 o'clock till noon. And then I would pick her up and take her home to the apartment, which is only a couple blocks away. And I sort of babysit her, and she would nap, and I would do my homework. And sometimes I would, and the washing, I did the laundry usually, and what little cleaning up needed to be done, because Mom was really working all day long away at the office. And sometimes I would fix supper if I had got around to it by then, and of course she would do it when she got there. So I don't know, I would say this, and I hadn't told anybody, I don't know if I probably told you, our first Christmas there was a very lonely day. I don't know why it was so lonely, because most of the time Mom and I were just in our own little blue heaven, and we weren't antisocial, but we enjoyed each other's company, and Ruth, but that day, no other family, and we had our Christmas. And I remember we had a little basketball net that hung on the door, and a little small basketball, and Mom and I played horse a little bit. I don't know what else we did, exactly to pass the day, but later, before long, the folks were able to come and visit. Her parents were, and her brother. Now, that Thanksgiving was interesting, our first Thanksgiving. The couple that became very dear friends, our first friends really on campus, Bob and Jeannie Spear. We met them the first night that all of us freshmen got together at the chapel for the orientation and got acquainted. They were from Oklahoma, and we'd been married. We'd been married about 4 or 5 years, and they'd just gotten married the week before. But we're same age, and he and I are practically, we're still the same age, amazingly. But we became friends, and he was carrying the newspaper man, I guess, and he had a route with about 300 papers, and I think he had a fellow that he got to help him. In the meantime, I had been fortunate to get a job kind of as a flunky at the New Orleans Times-Picayune newspaper. So that supplemented our income a little bit. But on Thanksgiving Day, because the paper had given a free turkey to each of their paper carriers, so they had a little apartment just a little ways from us, and so they had invited some friends of theirs and Maxine and me for Thanksgiving dinner. And we went over. They said, "Come on over, mid-morning we can visit some and all." And so we got there in time to go with Bob on his paper route. We must have had some kind of a thing for Ruth. I don't think I carried her. She was getting pretty good size by then. Walker, whatever you call it for kids. And so we went on the paper route with him while he was giving out his papers. And we got back in time. They had lunch ready, and it wasn't the biggest turkey in the world by any means, but each of us had a piece of turkey and all the other good stuff, and had a real nice Thanksgiving. And over on that side of town, near what they call the Irish Channel, was the 3rd Street Baptist Church, and that was the church that we attended before I got a call to my church back up in Alabama. And Mom, that's where it was close enough she could push Ruth over there on the carrier on Sunday mornings when I was out of town at my church in Alabama. So, and she got to meet, and right there at that church was one of our home mission board centers. I can't even think of the name of that now, but anyhow, we got to meet a lot of home missionaries, including Miss Gladys Keith, who was a pioneer there that I'd read about in books. And it was such a thrill and they gave me a job as janitor there later on. So I would get in from my church field in Alabama about 3 in the morning, and we didn't have classes on Monday, so the students could do their pastoral work in the weekend. And I would go over there and do the janitor work. But getting to meet all those people was a real thrill. And when our second daughter was born, they had a baby shower there. By that time, second year, we had a little seminary apartment in an old house, and we had a bunch of home missionaries and future former missionaries, and Miss Gladys Keith was there. So Beverly was highly honored, with all those wonderful people. And then when our son was born later, we gave him the middle name was Keith. And my grandson informed me recently I'd forgotten that he is also a Keith. So I don't know how that worked out from his parents. But so seminary, was wonderful. My grades weren't as good as in college. I'd had the best grade in the sophomore class at Howard College. But our baby wasn't very old by then, and later then I was called to a church, and so my grades fell off just a little bit. And in seminary, we had a neighbor upstairs, a friend he was a good student and a wonderful guy. He had a part-time job that took up quite a bit of his time working at a motel, and he was always late getting his papers in. He was such a perfectionist that he wanted them just right, and he just never had time to get them just right quite in time, so he was getting all these what they call incompletes on his report card. And he asked me one time how I handled that. I said, well, I think his name was John. I said, John, I always tried to get them in on time, even if I knew maybe they weren't what I could have done if I'd had more time. So it was a pretty demanding schedule all the way through. And some of our student friends, they were like us. They were working on the side and trying to, get by financially. And one of them cracked me up one day. He liked to joke. He said, Bob, he said, we figured out a way to save money on food. And I said, oh, good, I'd like to know about that. He said, well, we buy these dried beans and we eat them for lunch, and then at supper we drink a lot of water. I said, well, I don't know if I'm going to try that or not. I don't think we did. But, I just met so many wonderful people, students and the teachers, and in chapel, sometimes we'd have denominational leaders that came. So, but the highlight, well, I've told this in another interview. Living there, we were close to the school all the time. Now, when I was going to Alabama on the weekends, I would have to drive across town to the new seminary that was where housed a lot of the students. And the third year, it was open over there, so that's where I went to class. But that's where I went over to catch my ride. And when I was gone over the weekend, Mom had Ruth, and then, of course, Beverly came along. And she would take Ruth with her little tricycle down about a block from our house was one of the Catholic cemeteries where they buried people on top of the ground. They had all of these huge grave sites there, but they had sidewalks and they had a wall around it. And it was a very safe kind of protected area. And as Mom has said in some of her testimonies, we did have a lot of fellas that were drunk and sleeping on the sidewalks there and things like that. And she didn't much want to encounter that with our baby, so she took her to the cemetery to do her walking around. And while we were there, during that time, my brother was stationed in Mississippi in the Air Force, and my younger brother, and he came over and visited and kept her company some weekends, so that was another additional blessing that we had. And her folks came to visit, and my mom and stepdad came down from Nebraska, and I showed them around. It's the first time I saw all the sights of New Orleans. I've been living there, but there were still a lot of places I read about that we never got close to because we were pretty busy. And the Mardi Gras parade came down Saint something Boulevard there, just within about a block from our house, so we could go watch those parades, and Ruth could sit on my shoulders. And we did have a scare because I was going to the grocery store one day, and I think it was an A&P, and we got our groceries, and I was carrying her, and the milk was in a carton, and it was leaking. I did not know it as that, but the bottom of the sack broke through, and the groceries started falling, and I started grabbing for them. Ruth Ann tumbled off and did a head first onto a concrete sidewalk. Boy, I was scared to death then. I grabbed her up, and of course I called Maxine, but I went straight to the Southern Baptist Hospital for x-ray and all, and praise the Lord, it didn't do any damage. Or I don't think she even had a headache, if I remember, but that was a miracle. So that was another family event that we remember. Another funny thing, and I was talking to her the other day about that when she visited us, when my mother and father-in-law came, and my brother-in-law came to visit us from Alabama, and spent 2 or 3 days there in New Orleans. And so he took her. We had a little neighborhood grocery store, not the one where she fell, but right across the street. Took her over there, and at that time she would have been maybe almost 2. No, she would have been about 2.5 or 3 maybe. But she kept wanting mayonnaise. Well, he got every kind of jar of mayonnaise they had. No, that's not what she wanted. She kept insisting on mayonnaise. And he never did find it. And when he got back to the house, he asked us, what did she want? Well, that's her name for M&Ms for some reason. And so we didn't think to tell him. We didn't think about her asking. Now let me I shouldn't tell this one on her, but I'm going to. When we were pastoring our first church back close to Birmingham, we had a baby seat that went over the back of the pew, but it was a cloth one, nothing fancy, but she could sit in it, and it had a tray, and Mom would be up directing the choir or playing the piano or leading Bible school, whatever she was doing. And Ruth was sitting in this, and we would always take some Rice Krispies and put on that tray, or she could get them one by one, and she ran out of them one day in church, and she said, I pee-pee, Mama, I pee-pee. And the young people cracked up all over the place, how that would be. But Ruth remembers that. We don't bring it up very often, but that was another one of our experiences. I do have to say about that the people there were very patient with a young preacher. I was 21 years old, had been called to preach for a few months, and it was a college acquaintance that we had ate lunch together at the little snack bar. Took our sack lunch with us and ate together and visited most every time, but he left that church to go to another one and gave him my name, so that's how I got the call out there. But anyhow, that was pretty good training, and working on the side, we learned how to get by. So back in New Orleans, driving across town was an experience. Because coming in on Sunday night, we came right down Bourbon Street. But there was hardly any traffic. You could pretty well see what was going on, but it was late enough. And I have to say that the church family up in the Piney Woods in Alabama, where I served, almost every Sunday night after church, they would send me a a box of food in a shoebox to take to Maxine. And I'd get home between 3 and 4 in the morning, and we'd have a big reunion there with that food from Alabama. So I'll never forget that experience. That's part of our New Orleans story. It's hard to think about New Orleans without thinking about our New Prospect Baptist Church in Clark County, Alabama. Here again, it was a student who had been working there, and he moved to another church and gave him my name. Well, he had a big black Packard. This boy was from New England somewhere, but he had been witnessed to by a Southern Baptist chaplain in the military, Navy, I think, and became a Christian, and the chaplain had kind of referred him to New Orleans for his training. So he owned this car, and there were, I guess, 4 others of us that rode with him. And he liked to drive the car and take care of it. He didn't want anybody else fooling with it. So that worked out. We paid him $5 a trip. It was about a 250-mile trip every Saturday morning and then going home on Sunday night. And one Sunday night, we went to a restaurant to get out, and I would look around and see if there was anybody because my church field was about 20 more miles out in the woods. And I got to church somehow every Saturday, found people there shopping or whatever. And one Sunday night, and we met back at this church at a certain time to head back, and I was late that night. I don't remember why, but I caught the bus and went back. And the next weekend, one of my buddies, Ernie from Tennessee, one of my preacher buddies on the trip, he said, fellas, he said, Bob Stewart won't have to go overseas to be a foreign missionary. He said, I went by his church the other day. It really was out in the woods, but wonderful people and wonderful cooks. Come to find out, their former pastor was not used to Southern cooking, or I don't know, maybe the culture. But sometimes they said he would bring his own food in a bag to eat on the weekend when he was up there. But I made a hit with cooks everywhere I went, including Thailand, because I did enjoy eating. Interesting what I'm saying that right now, but I did. And had stayed in a different home every Saturday night, so I really got to know the people. And some of them they had good senses of humor. I remember one younger family, they had a new baby, and I went to visit them this Saturday after I got up there, and the little one, I kind of, I was talking baby talk, and she kind of laughed out, the baby did, and her mama said, well, preacher, said, that's nothing. I said, I laughed the first time I saw you too. But I mean, we stayed 2 summers up there, one in an old house I won't talk about a lot, but it was hadn't been used in 7 years. We had to haul water a mile, and the privy was way out in the back. But my beautiful Alabama wife, who was a farm girl, didn't say a word. She mentioned it later in her writing. It was kind of not a very comfortable place, but she was I call her a foot soldier, a good sport. And we had a great time, and we had company one time that stayed a whole week in that old house, and the stove wasn't working because we tried it once and the chimney got so red we were afraid to go and burn the house down. I guess we did have one little, what do you call them, a plate?
Hot plate.
Yeah. But that happened to be our revival meeting week, and so all the church families invited them to come with us, to eat all the meals. So they got some good meals, and people enjoyed having them. They were from Birmingham. And part of that summer now we spent going back to visit my folks, because I hadn't been back in several years. So that took part of the summer, but we went back another summer and had a nice brand new little fresh wooden house. It was small, not painted. You could smell the wood, but it was clean. It was kind of paradise like that summer. And we had the church was pretty old, but we had the first 4th of July picnic they ever had, first young people's choir, first Bible school, because they had local fellows that came out and preached on the weekend and weren't really able to spend time pastoring. And I started going half-time, and pretty soon they were giving me $40 a trip. I asked them if we could go full-time and just pay me whatever the offering was, up to $40. So that was, most of the time we were full-time. And regretted leaving there, but we could, we felt like we'd probably, it was a limited area. There were very few new people there, and felt like we probably need some more experience. So when we got a call from Pineapple, where I had 6 churches then, that was a different kind of experience. But seminary, the last year I had to drive across town, and I did have a wreck one day. That kind of slowed me down. But the whole thing, I think I mentioned I got to work at the home mission center and got to spend more time with Gladys and all the workers there. So it was an education. Then I got to work with the Carver Center, was a center for the black children over in another area. I did the floors there, but I also helped with recreation one night a week. And many years later, now this was in like 1953 or 4, I guess. Could have been part of a year. In probably 96 or 7 or 8, Maxine and I were in a missions conference in North Texas. And on Saturday night, we usually had a get-together and introduced the missionaries. And so after the service, this very nice dressed and wonderful black fellow that I met, he came up to me, he said, "Are you the Bob Stewart that used to come and play games with us at Carver Center?" I said, "Yeah." He said, "Well, I was one of those kids, and now now he was the director of the place." So that was kind of exciting, Okay, well, I could go on and on, I guess. Now, driving down Bourbon Street, let me say I never was tempted to stop. So we just saw it from the outside, and things were pretty quiet by that time of night. Anyhow, I didn't see any fighting or too many drunks and things like that. I did get to preach at the Men's Rescue Mission there a time or two, back before I had my church. We had some mission assignments, and I remember one night that I was to preach there. I got home from school that day, and we took the Times-Picayune, and the headline was about 4 inches tall, and it said, "Stalin dead." Well, that gave me a sermon right there on the fact that no matter how powerful you are, you could not stop death. And, what the Bible says about it, and how fast life can be, and what a bad decision it is to neglect the Lord and leave Him out of your life. So it didn't take long to prepare that sermon, but I remember those headlines. Well, I think that's about covered it.
Well, the last thing I want to ask about that is Mom's case of malaria.
Oh, yeah, that was interesting. Well, I probably shouldn't tell all the details about it, but on that trip I mentioned we went in 52, summer 52. We started off, by that time my parents had been divorced for quite a while and remarried. I had wonderful step-parents that I only saw very seldom because we were in Alabama and they were up in Nebraska and South Dakota. But we did go visit them. Well, at that time, Dad wasn't, that was before he remarried, but he was cutting hair there in a little town called White River, up in a Rosebud Indian reservation. a little small town where he later lived and passed away, and we saw his grave actually a number of years later, right beside the White River where he loved to go. But anyhow, we were there over a weekend, and he got me a chance to preach at the Methodist church there. Okay, we stayed. This little hotel was just kind of a upstairs over a store building. Anyhow, we came to Nebraska and visited Mom, and let's see, I don't know if George was in the picture yet. Anyhow, we had a nice visit with her, and then got on back to New Orleans, and Maxine was real excited about it because all that time she had her bachelor's degree, and she was a teacher when I met her and she taught a total of 5 years in public school. But she hadn't had any Bible teaching much, or in college or seminary. Hadn't been able to go to seminary because she was working or busy. So that looked like she was going to be able to take some classes in seminary. So we went, but she was feeling kind of poorly when we got to New Orleans. And we went to the clinic, and they had one of the students he was an MD, but he was a young fellow. And he checked her over some, and he said, well, I hate to tell you, but I think you've got malaria. So she did not get to go to school. But pretty soon we found out that malaria turned out to be a little girl named Beverly. Beverly, I'm talking about you. And I thought of some other names. Recently I thought, because when we went back later and Beverly was a little girl and we went to White River, she and Ruth would be out on the sidewalk and see the elderly Indians. There was more Indians than white folks there. And some of these old Indian ladies would look at them and just kind of fall with their eyes, and it was kind of spooky to them. But I thought, now Beverly could be called White River for obvious reasons. Or I thought about Rosebud, because that's the name of that tribe, or that reservation. I thought Rosebud would be a pretty nice name, and we checked it out with Wendy, and she said, well, I don't know which would be better, but we still decided to stay with Beverly. But anyhow, and after Beverly was born, the malaria seemed to clear up right away. And by that time, though, let's see, it was already into May, and the school year was ending, and it was time to go back to the church field. No. We took her to the church field our first summer, so that would have been May of '53, and she was born in May. And she was the center of attention. All those country folks were just so proud to meet our new baby and have some chance with her, and so she was star of the show that summer. But by the next May, she was 1 year old, and the day after her birthday was when we moved to Pineapple. So that was we got back to New Orleans twice for a missions conference. One time in '55, and back in '96, we were supposed to play our music at the Southern Baptist Convention, and the program got changed around. So that was to take place in the Super Bowl there, and we had the Renat set up under one of the goal posts when we found out about the change in program, so that was all right. But we had just come from Nebraska, where my mom had been in a coma, and the day we got to New Orleans, that Saturday, we had a message that she'd passed away that day. But anyhow, New Orleans, that visit in '95, I said '55, that was a great experience. By that time, the seminary had bought a department store which was right next to the campus there. I mentioned that I had my third-year classes on the new campus out on the other side of town. So this building was offices and the student center, and that's where we had we had our displays from Thailand set up and got to talk with the students and all that. And interesting thing was, on Monday afternoon before the thing started the next day, one of the students came and took us around to show us the old campus, where which most of these folks hadn't been to school there, but that part of town. And he was a seminary classmate. He was still in New Orleans serving in a church. So we had a little reunion there with him. And as we drove around the square, now Rachel Sims, that was the home mission center that I used to keep clean. It was there was a little park, city park, and the center was right there on one side, and then 3rd Street Church was over here. As we drove around that square, one of the missionaries from Africa said, "That's where I grew up." And I came to know the Lord at that center. So that was kind of special, too, to see that our work had, and of course, no telling how much good, that's probably as much of a foreign mission field almost as Thailand was.